updated belum?
Udah, Bu. Press con, Bu.
Belum.
Yang press con, Bu.
Oh ini. Udah yang terbaru ya?
Ya.
Oke.
Nah, ya.
Ini udah ya? Yang tadi capture yang sudah ya?
Ya.
So I'm going to speak.
Ya,
Bisa ngomongin lah. Enggak nyampe 10 menit kali.
Iya, kalau nggak sampai nggak apa-apa.
Kalau lebih pendek boleh kan? Iya, boleh. Kemudian dari floor. Dari floor. Ya.
Yang tadi Wemby nggak ada di sini.
AWB itu, Bu. Ladies and gentlemen, we could start our press conference. Ladies and gentlemen, media colleagues who are attending offline or also virtually tonight, good evening from Nusa Dua, Bali, Indonesia. My name is Febrio Kacaribu. Welcome to the press conference of the G20 second and the last Joint Finance and Health Ministers meeting. I will be moderating this press conference. The Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Health of the Republic of Indonesia held the second G20 Joint Finance and Health Ministers meeting under the Indonesian G20 presidency on a hybrid basis on November 12, 2022. Minister of Finance, Her Excellency Sri Mulyani Indrawati, and Minister of Health, His Excellency Budi Gunadi Sadikin, chaired the meeting's sessions. Ministers of Finance and Health Ministers of G20 member countries, invitees, and international organizations attended the second and final joint meeting under the Indonesian presidency to discuss the progress on the Financial Intermediary Fund for Pandemic Preparedness, Prevention, and Response, the Pandemic Fund, and the development of coordination arrangement between finance and health for pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response. Today's meeting is a follow-up of the first meeting that was held in Yogyakarta back in June 2022, and also the finance ministers and central bank governors' annual meetings held in Washington, D.C. in October 2022. We have here Indonesian Minister of Finance, Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, and Minister of Health, His Excellency Bapak Budi Gunadi Sadikin on stage to talk about the meetings. In the next 60 minutes, Excellencies will each give about 10-minute remarks. After that, the floor will be invited to ask questions. Due to limit time, those who join virtually, questions can be written on the chat box. So we will, without further ado, Bu Sri Mulyani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pak Febrio. Very good evening to all of you. Good morning or good afternoon for those of you who participated from different parts of the world. Tonight, we've already concluded our second and the final meeting joined between Finance Minister and Health Ministers. This meeting is actually mandated by our leaders, the G20 leaders, since 2021 Rome Declaration, in which Minister of Finance and Minister of Health established the task force, the Joint Health and Finance Task Force, in order for us to be able to address the issue of the pandemic, especially on the preparedness and responses. We all understand that pandemic, COVID-19 is not going to be the last one. The frequency of the pandemic, as well as the nature of the pandemic that can create a huge, significant loss, of course, in terms of human, as well as from the economy, has been fully recognized. And COVID-19 is among the very, very significant implication from both casualties as well as economic consequences. So during leaders meeting in 2021, the Rome Declaration mandating finance ministers and health ministers to establish the financial intermediary facility for us to be able to address the ability for the world to prepare better and to respond better for the next pandemic. We are very glad and happy that tonight we were able to achieve this deliverable in a very significant way. The Joint Finance Health Task Force, which is co-chaired by Italy as well as Indonesia, and supported with the Secretariat, which is supported by WHO and World Bank, is already advancing our mandate from the G20 leaders by establishing financial intermediary facility, which is now we are going to call it as a pandemic fund. On this pandemic fund, the G20 high-level independent panel, as already recommended before, identifying that the world require or need approximately 10 billion pandemic preparedness and response financing gap. So the first initial establishment of this pandemic fund, which is currently we are receiving now 20 contributors, both the G20 members country as well as non-G20 members country, as well as also some philanthropists, 3 philanthropists at least identified. They are all contributing now up to 1.4 billion. In fact, tonight, we also receive at least 3 countries expressing that they are going to also contribute, including Australia, and then France, and Saudi. They are going to announce the amount, especially during the leaders' meeting. So this is going to be expected larger than 1.4 billion. With that kind of pandemic fund, which is already established, we are now focusing on how we are going to improve the international health architecture. Still continue the role of WHO as a technical lead, as well as chairing the technical advisory panel, and the World Bank as in this case as a trustee for the pandemic fund. We've already also appointed the chairperson, in this case, a joint between Indonesia and Rwanda, that is Pak Khatib Brasri, as well as Minister Hamjin, which is going to chair this fund. And we will then starting to ask for the proposal of the use of this fund. All members of the G20 requesting that the governance of this fund should be inclusive, and especially also paying more attention for the low-income country and developing country in terms of building their capacity for the pandemic preparedness. So this is really a very good deliverable, concrete one, and also showing a strong commitment and collaboration from all G20 members countries, supporting by international organization, as well as the commitment coming from many philanthropy. We are going to continue our working between finance and health ministers, as discussed during tonight's session, that this joint finance and health minister is going to be continue even in the more multiple year modalities, which is following the Troika. This will ensure that the continuation of the work joined between finance and health will be continued. So with that, I will pass to Pak Budi in terms of how we are going to continue building this pandemic fund and especially also strengthening the international health architecture. Pak Budi.
Yeah. Thank you, Ibu Sri Mulyani. So my media, the importance between health and wealth, between Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance to work together is because when we look throughout history in the last 20 years, global pandemic have a great financial impact. Let me give you some example. The H1N1 pandemic in 2003. The economic cost is 50 billion US dollar. And this pandemic repeat again in 2009, the same H1N1, and it again cost the world economically another 50 billion. Ebola in 2014, another 50 billion US dollar cost to the global economy. And you know the biggest so far is COVID-19 in 2019, 2020 until now, which already cost global economy around 12 trillion US dollar. So that is the reason why G20, which started in 2008 with a mandate for fully economic, now is start thinking to combine health and finance. The reason being is, health crisis can create a significant economic impact globally. And it repeated again, like financial crisis. So health crisis, global health crisis, repeat again, like global financial crisis. And like global financial crisis, also give a tremendous impact to global economy. The second topic that I would like to share with you is, and if you see 2022, there is a small pandemic also. You remember the monkeypox? And there is an Ebola outbreak, small outbreak also in Uganda. So again, health crisis now is becoming more frequent. Before it's around 100-year cycle. Different with financial crisis cycle, maybe every 10 years. But now health crisis becoming faster. So the second topic is global health architecture are not as advanced as global finance architecture. Because I've been in finance for 30 years. Ibu Sri Mulyani have a very strong World Bank or IMF for every global financial crisis, in terms of which they can jump in with a very clear mandate, with a very clear process and governance. So we don't have it in health. So we need to replicate what global finance architecture has in terms of global institutions to help every country in every corner of the world if there is a global financial crisis and replicate if there is a global health crisis. So then we decided, let's not reinvent the wheel, let's establish this joint finance and health task force so we can replicate and institutionalize what we do have in global finance architecture into global health architecture. And Indonesia is taking a role. You remember, IMF and World Bank was established in 1944 in the aftermath of World War II. And it's proven these two great institutions play a major role in global finance architecture to protect the world for the future global financial crisis. So Indonesia now take a lead. We would like to replicate itself by establishing an institution called the Pandemic Fund that Ibu Sri Mulyani has mentioned, that can play a major role as one of the important pillars in global health architecture, not global finance architecture, that we believe can also protect the world, ourselves, humanity, for future pandemic crisis or global health crisis. And then we go to the fund. This fund, in finance, because we would like to replicate, not reinvent the wheel, what has been done in the global finance architecture and how the fund Asia foresee in the future will be. So I stop here, Ibu. Thank you.
Yeah. So this pandemic fund, which is located at the World Bank, was actually established on September 8th. And until now, we have 1.4 billion US dollar final commitment, which is announced by 20 countries donors and 3 philanthropists. This is a very good and strong start, and we will continue welcome the contribution from any countries or parties in this case, not only limited to the G20. The PPR gaps, which is already identified by high-level experts, which is requiring 10 billion, showing or indicating that we still continue have a homework to be done. This funding will expected to catalyze a more investment which is needed for the world to be able to better prepare for the next pandemic, and also as a platform to facilitate the coordination, coherent approach on the pandemic preparedness and response. President Jokowi is going to launch this fund on November 13. We are going to make this event as a launching of the pandemic fund event. This is one of President Jokowi on the acceptance of the presidency or taking over from the Italy, in which Indonesia focused. One of the most important priority for Indonesia is to address the issue of pandemic and how the world can establish a financing mechanism that is reliable to respond to pandemic better. And that's why Pak Budi mentioned it. And this one, as mentioned earlier, has already a governing board, which is chaired by Bapak Khatib Basri from Indonesia, together with Mr. Daniel Ngamije. He is the Minister of Health from Rwanda. The G20 will provide strategic guidance for the pandemic fund's priorities. And in this case, currently, this pandemic fund calling for funding proposal that is going to be submitted by all countries in order for them to be able to use this funding according to the priority of strengthening pandemic preparedness and responses. The G20, in this case, will look forward to the launching of the pandemic fund as well as call for paper, which hopefully can be then decided by the end of the year. So this collaboration under the pandemic fund is actually a testimony as well as an evidence that not only one sectoral like the health minister need to work and address the issue of pandemic, but we can work together jointly between finance and health. And that's why within the G20 we have the commitment for this joint finance and health minister will continue to be maintained under multiple year agenda, and also in order for us to be able to continue learning each other on what is the best practice for us to deal with the pandemic. For ministers, we are going to now ask the task force to actually design what is the modalities between the task force secretariat that is working with the next G20 presidency under India and the G20 Troika, in which Indonesia is going to continue play the role. We asked the task force to actually submit the work plan for 2023, but at the same time also taking into account a multiple years approach or planning in this case. So with that, I would like to also use this opportunity to express appreciation and also gratitude to many of the support which is strongly expressed by all G20 members as well as international organizations to the leadership of Indonesia G20 presidency. We look forward for the India, in this case, that is going to take the presidency on the G20 next year, and will continue also support the India presidency. So with that, I will get back to Pak Febrio for any question that is going to be raised by the media.
Thank you, Ministers. Concrete deliverable of Indonesia G20 presidency. This is really a testimony of also global multilateralism, still delivering results for the global population. Thank you, Minister Budi Gunadi, also highlighting the strong connection between health and wealth, how pandemic in history has really huge impact on global economy in terms of economic and social cost. With that, we will open questions from the floor. I will take the first three, one from the front, and second, and then the lady from the back. So go ahead. Do you have a mic? Okay.
Hi, Minister Budi and Minister Sri Mulyani. Thank you so much for talking this late. I've got two questions regarding today's meeting.
Could you mention your name?
Oh, sorry, I'm Stanley. I'm from Reuters. My first question is, of the 20 countries plus donors, sorry, out of the 20 G20 countries, who are the holdouts for the pandemic fund? Who hasn't contributed to the fund? And any reason that has been given? And the second question I have is regarding the meeting itself. Was it sidetracked by what Minister Budi would say geopolitics issues, such as the Russian war invasion? Was it sidetracked by, by any means necessary? And yeah, and how did Indonesia respond to that? Thank you.
All right. Somebody can deliver the mic, please.
Selamat malam Pak Febrio, Bu Ani, dan Pak Budi. Saya Aziz dari Kata Data. Saya mau nanya terkait, kalau nggak salah kan Indonesia itu sudah berkontribusi 50 juta US dollar ya Bu. Nah itu ada rencana nggak Bu tahun ini berapa untuk tambahan, apakah akan menambah lagi gitu untuk kontribusinya. Terus yang kedua kalau nggak salah untuk pandemic fund ini sudah bisa dimanfaatkan tahun ini dan apakah Indonesia berencana untuk mengajukan proposal untuk penggunaan dana ini gitu, dan apakah sudah ada beberapa negara yang berminat untuk mengajukan proposal untuk penggunaan dana ini gitu. Terima kasih.
Thank you. And then the last lady from the back.
Okay, thank you. I'm Ismi from Nikkei Asia. I would like to ask if you may remind us about the 10 billion, the 10 billion fund that was initially recommended by the WHO and other parties who were designing the initiative. Will there be some kind of a deadline if this amount can be achieved? Ideally, as you already mentioned as well in your remarks earlier, there will be imminent for the pandemic to ever occur again in the future. Also, what is your recommendation as Indonesia will be part of the Troika in the next year for the joint health and finance task force to resume? Because if this will be the concrete deliverables this time, what do you see this kind of collaboration will continue in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. So we got three questions from the Reuters about countries contributing. Is there any politics? Aziz Katadata asking about Indonesia's contribution. Is there going to be any further contribution? And how about proposals? How soon can it be used? And Ismi from Nikkei Asia, about 10 billion needed. Any deadline on that? And how is Indonesian role on Troika later? Ministers, please.
Well, the country which is already contributed, which is confirmed with the number, with amount, in this case, European Commission, USA, Italy, Indonesia, China, Japan, Germany, Canada, Republic of Korea, United Arab Emirates, Spain, Australia, Singapore, Norway, New Zealand, and tonight we also heard that France as well as Saudi, although they are going to announce at the leaders level how much they are going to contribute, South Africa and India. So these are all the G20 as well as the invited countries which is already also commit for this providing contribution. We have three philanthropists, that is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller, and Wellcome Trust. How we are going to link this with the need for the 10 billion? This is, as we are all know that funding for health is actually have many form. whether this is within many multilateral development bank, World Bank, ADB, and many other institutions, AIIB, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank. So basically, this fund can become a catalytic forces in order for them to be able to mobilize funding coming from different sources. Not to mention other bilateral, and also we have maybe Pak Budi can also provide. We have Gavi, we have Global Fund. These are all the funding which is actually being mobilized, especially in addressing the issue of health. So there is always a possibility for this fund to be able to then work together, and that's why we use the word catalytic, or creating a leverage by inviting or crowding in many other funding in order for the world to be able to better prepare for this pandemic. On Indonesia commitment, 50 million is actually way above the Indonesia, our own, what you call it, economic contribution, economic share within the world. So this is being seen as a very well-respected commitment from Indonesia, because we hold presidency as well as, in this case, providing the walk, the talk on the leadership of Indonesia presidency. And also because of the commitment of President Jokowi that we want to establish this mechanism in the form of establishing funding, so that we are going to be able to accelerate and support in a credible way pandemic preparedness and response. So Indonesia, 50 million is actually way above the average other emerging country, or even if you compare with some advanced country. The request for proposal has been distributed. Of course, Indonesia also, maybe Pak Budi is going to then answer to this question. Indonesia definitely also eligible to use this fund. And this is need for us to coincide with our own health reform, which Pak Budi is going to explain later. So we are going to use this as a blended with our own government commitment, both on our budget for central government and local government. Don't forget, in Indonesia context, health is also decentralizing to the local government. So this is going to be one of the area which we are going to explore more. So how many proposal, maybe you can ask, because this is still ongoing until the end of December. So I'm sure there will be, if I'm not mistaken, Pak Khatib Basri mentioned during the intervention on the session, at least 300 proposal has been submitted. So there will be how we are going to select the priority. There is a governance which is now being established on this pandemic preparedness and fund, the pandemic fund, in order for us to be able to have a good inclusive governance and process, avoiding conflict of interest, good governance, all those things which is now the focus of building the sound and good governance for this funding. In terms of the priority, many of the G20 members asking that the priorities should really support for low-income country and emerging, developing countries, which they still need to build their health system in order for them to be able to better prepare for the next pandemic. We learn a lot from this pandemic, so we have at least an idea about what area that needs still to be strengthened. So that more or less the discussion on the geopolitics. I think that's why in terms of this, the outcome from this meeting, we are separating into two parts. The first part is the one which we are reflecting and summarizing what is being stated on what we call it the global health context. The context globally, meaning including the geopolitics and how this is going to affect. But the rest of the paragraph is actually the agreement of deliverable. So this is really a very strong outcome. As of the first part, I think this is also following what the finance minister and central bank governor meeting on our previous 3 meetings back in April, July, and then last October, in which the paragraph related to the global context, which is related to the war in Ukraine, that we just summarizing, and then the rest of the paragraph we just agreed we are putting as a separate paragraph, which is we call it like communique type. Okay.
I would like to about the geopolitics, because you know G20, to make a decision you have to have 100% consensus. Group of people, a group of country that you have to have 100% consensus, and then you understand that this is the most difficult situations geopolitically, where opportunity to make a consensus is very difficult because
because of the event. So remember, G20, to make decisions, you need to have 100% consensus. Number 2, to make 100% consensus is extremely difficult in these situations. And you know what the fact is? The pandemic fund was established. So, thanks to Pak Jokowi, thanks to Ibu Sri Mulyani, we get things done, despite of a very or extremely difficult geopolitical situation. That is something that I'd like to share. Number 2, about the proposal. We have been working. Indonesia is very keen. We would like to prioritize on items that is high on our agenda to prevent for the future of pandemics. Like example, we would like to establish a very strong national public health lab across the country. 34 provinces, 514 cities, a very strong public health lab to do surveillance. So any pathogens, bacteria, virus, or parasite happens or appears, we can identify quickly. Second, we would like to submit a proposal that related with biotechnology, because these diseases come from living things, we call it. So we have to understand biotechnology. The medicine also based on biotechnology. You heard about the mRNA vaccine. So investment in bioinformatics, in biobanks, it is something that we would like to propose. That is on the proposal. The last one on the 10 billion gaps, as Ibu Sri Mulyani mentions, that is the gaps for the world to be prepared for the next pandemic. Doesn't have to be 100% funded by this institution, this pandemic fund. Because this pandemic fund can complement the other institutions that already have a lot of funding in the health sector. Like example, the Global Fund. I was involved in the replenishment in Washington just a month ago, and they can raise first round $14.5 billion US, and they are keep increasing it by time. Gavi has proven during the pandemic they can raise around $10 billion US also during the pandemic. So what important is this pandemic fund can play as a catalyst, as the first entrance. So when they can come and people will see, okay, this fund already committed, then we will follow. And you know that there are even larger institutions like the World Bank or the IMF that have more than 100 billions of war chests that can jump in if the first risk is being covered by this fund. So those are the three things that I would like to ask Bu. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Minister Budi Gunadi. We will open the floor for 3 more questions. Any more questions from the floor? 1, 2, and 3. Go ahead.
Tes. Selamat malam Bu Menteri dan Pak Menkes. Nama saya Genta dari Antara. Bu Menteri, you've mentioned that on Joint Health and Finance Task Force, there will be objective targeted in 2023. So after the meetings, what's the objective for this task force next year? And second question is, Pak Chatip Basri now is assigned as the chair of Pandemic Fund Governing Board. Will his position will be permanent or not? If not, how long he will stay in position? Thank you.
Okay, next one, lady in the front.
Selamat malam Pak Febrio, Bu Sri, dan Pak Budi. Saya Nisha dari merdeka.com Bu. Izin mau mendalami pertanyaan dari Ajis. Apakah di pertemuan itu juga, di pertemuan tadi juga sudah ditentukan kriteria secara detailnya di setiap negara untuk penerimanya seperti apa, pengguna dana itu? Itu aja, terima kasih.
Thank you. And then one more question from the lady at the back.
Selamat malam Bapak Ibu Menteri, saya Mega dari Kompas TV. I would like to asking in bahasa. First for Bu Sri Mulyani, pertama adalah bagaimana mekanisme pencairan dana pandemi ini. Lalu kedua, bagaimana mekanisme pengembaliannya juga. Gap 10 miliar itu bagaimana komitmen negara G20 untuk mengejar target itu. Untuk Pak Budi, bagaimana komitmen G20 untuk pencegahan pandemi di masa mendatang, terutama agar tidak terjadi ketimpangan vaksin seperti yang terjadi di waktu COVID baru muncul. Yang kedua adalah apa yang akan terjadi ketika pandemic fund ini, apabila gap 10 miliar US dollar ini tidak terpenuhi, apa yang kemungkinan terjadi jika global menghadapi pandemi lagi. Terima kasih.
So there are 3 questions. Objective for the task force next year, also criteria for countries that are recipient countries, and mechanism and how G20 commitment for avoiding vaccine gap in the future. Ministers, please.
Karena 3 pertanyaannya pakai bahasa Indonesia, saya boleh jawab pakai bahasa Indonesia enggak? Oke, lega gitu. Oke. The task force atau disebut gugus tugas dalam hal ini dibantu oleh sekretariat gugus tugas yang selama ini adalah disupport joint antara WHO dan World Bank. Tugas dari gugus tugas adalah terus mematangkan tadi modalitas hubungan antara Health dan Finance Ministers Forum yang sesudah belajar semenjak terjadinya COVID pandemi tahun 2020 dan kemudian dibentuk di dalam rangka kita bisa merespons better dari pandemi ini, ternyata bisa menghasilkan hasil yang sangat konkret dalam waktu yang relatif sangat cepat. Tentu karena ini juga disampaikan oleh semua G20 members, karena leadership Indonesia, komitmen dari pimpinan Presiden Jokowi dan kita semua para menteri untuk make sure bahwa kita bisa menghasilkan sesuatu yang konkret, deliverable dari sisi joint health and finance. Nah, melihat modalitas hubungan finance dan health ministers ini, maka diputuskan bahwa task force akan diberikan assignment sampai 2023 untuk menyampaikan laporan mengenai bagaimana this task force akan lebih diefektifkan. Isu-isu apa saja yang akan dibahas di dalam G20, karena pada saat yang sama juga banyak anggota G20 yang juga mengetahui, recognizing bahwa peranan WHO perlu terus ditingkatkan. Makanya bagaimana supaya kita bisa menata antara internasional arsitektur dari health itu, di mana peranan WHO ada di sana, tapi juga ada World Bank atau Multilateral Development Bank yang lain, institusi multilateral, dan bagaimana hubungan mekanisme antara health dan finance. Kalau finance dalam hal ini sama dengan finance dan center bank, kita punya mekanisme untuk pertemuan 2 kali dalam setahun melalui IMF World Bank Annual Meeting, Spring dan Fall Meeting. Itu kemudian selalu bisa mengidentifikasi berbagai persoalan-persoalan yang menantang dan menjadi persoalan dunia dan bagaimana meresponsnya dari sisi financing. Makanya kemudian digunakan instrumen multilateral institution seperti World Bank atau Regional Development Bank dan juga IMF. Nah, ini ada dananya, ada mekanismenya, ada institusinya. Dan ini well established. Di health ministers, mereka punya WHO dan punya beberapa tadi yang disampaikan inisiatif. Belum kita bicara tentang tadi UNICEF, ada Gavi, ada Bill Melinda Gates and all those yang semuanya Global Fund. Ini banyak sekali isu dedicated health, tapi kadang-kadang fundingnya nggak selalu pasti. Sedangkan yang health, yang finance kita selalu bicara tentang financing. So pada saat kita dihadapkan pada pandemi dibutuhkan suatu mekanisme yang mestinya bisa diandalkan, reliable, mengenai bagaimana health dan finance itu bisa as early as possible dan juga as consistent as possible untuk bisa mengidentifikasi kalau ada persoalan pandemi dan area apa saja yang harus diperhatikan dan bagaimana fundingnya. Itulah yang diminta tadi untuk di-address oleh task force Indonesia dan Italia. Dianggap menggambarkan mengenai di satu sisi adalah advanced country, negara dengan high income, dan Indonesia menggambarkan emerging country members dari G20 sehingga bisa pandangannya lebih seimbang mencerminkan diversity dari G20 membership. Itulah yang ditugaskan kepada task force. Jadi Indonesia dengan Italia akan sharing ini, co-sharing. Kemudian sekretariat dari gugus tugas atau task force termasuk tadi WHO yang diandalkan dari sisi technical expertise akan terus mengeksplor berbagai posibilitas atau kemungkinan-kemungkinan bentuk kerjasama finance dan health yang harus terus dipertahankan. Paling tidak tadi dalam jangka pendek 2023 selama presidensi India dan juga diharapkan mid-year atau medium term yaitu multiple years. Ada disebutkan bisa 3 tahun karena sesuai dengan kepemimpinan Troika dalam hal ini. Saya rasa itu tadi pertanyaan apa yang lain apa Pak? Pak mekanisme untuk withdrawal dan proposal ini kan sebetulnya bagian dari pertama governance dari funding ini adalah mengikuti trust funds governance dalam Bank Dunia. Dalam artian di dalam Bank Dunia adalah menjadi trustee-nya. Jadi bagaimana pengelolaan dana itu mengikuti governance dalam trustee. Namun untuk apa saja, siapa yang eligible, bagaimana pembayarannya, ini nanti akan dibahas oleh tadi governing board yang dimana Pak Khatib Basri dan Ngamije yaitu Menteri Keuangan Rwanda, Menteri Kesehatan Rwanda akan memimpin pembahasan mengenai bagaimana tata kelola dan mekanisme serta kriteria penggunaan dana itu. Jadi fundingnya sendiri dikelola di dalam trust fundnya Bank Dunia untuk bisa diyakinkan bahwa mereka itu aman ya, tidak hilang, well governed. Kriteria menggunakannya nanti akan diputuskan oleh governing body yang dipimpin oleh Pak Khatib dan Menteri Kesehatan dari Rwanda. Saya rasa itu, jadi nanti Pak Khatib Basri sama Dr. Ngamije akan memimpin. Berapa lama mereka kemarin diputuskan di dalam board untuk leadership yang sekarang ini ya di appoint, nanti untuk siklus berapa lama saya rasa nanti akan dibahas lebih lanjut mengenai tata kelola yang lebih permanen. Karena kemarin dananya sudah dimobilisasi, jadi kita perlu untuk segera membentuk governing board, gitu ya.
Aku nambahin sedikit, kalau objektif task force-nya, kalau dari sisi kita di kesehatan, mengenai sources of fund-nya sudah rapi semua. Kita mau talk about the uses of fund. Jadi WHO will play a major role. Funding ini mau di use-nya gimana, ya itu yang penting. Jadi uses of fund-nya instead of source of fund-nya which is already done. Mengenai kriteria penerima negara tadi Ibu Ani saya rasa udah lengkap. Kemudian tadi ada pertanyaan spesifik mengenai komitmen untuk vaccine equality issues kan. Justru vaccine equality issue happens karena rich country itu bisa kasih down payment first and secure the vaccine. Low and middle income country, they don't have access karena mereka nggak punya uang. So that is the reason kenapa pandemic fund ini was established. Sehingga pandemic fund ini can be used to give down payment, to secure the certain allocation of vaccine for developing countries. Ya, itu sebabnya kenapa ini dibikin, justru karena itu supaya bisa dapat. Ada pertanyaan tadi apa kemungkinannya kalau 10 billion fund ini tidak dicapai? 10 billion per year itu kan gap. Kalau kita mau memastikan seluruh negara di seluruh dunia is ready supaya zero chance terjadi ininya bisa mencegah pandemik, gapnya segitu. Nah gap ini bisa diisi oleh multilateral organization, bisa diisi juga oleh country-nya itself sebenarnya. Nah jadi kalau ditanya ya gap ini nggak usah semuanya diisi oleh pandemic fund ini kalau menurut saya. Toh pandemic fund ini bisa masuk duluan, nanti kalau ada gap lain WHO bisa bilang udah diisinya lewat global fund, diisinya lewat Gavi, diisinya mungkin lewat World Bank. World Bank kan uangnya banyak sekali. Mungkin bisa diisi oleh any other multilateral institution atau bilateral bisa juga disupport. Or the country, kalau dia misalnya growing kayak Indonesia kan makin lama makin kaya. So we can use our own funding to fill the gap. Itu dari saya. Makasih.
Thank you. I think we're gonna close. The pandemic has made us really all aware of the importance of health and the economy and the interdependence between the two. Today's meeting marks progress, such as substantial synergies between financial and health sectors to prepare for the future pandemics. This is quite remarkable, and I think this is also quite remarkable timing for us to do press conference almost midnight from Bali, Indonesia. So thank you so much for Minister Sri Mulyani and also Minister Budi for the time. And thank you everybody. Good night from Bali. Stay safe.
Bapak.